Assalamu alaikum and welcome in episode 16 of Rise and Fall of the Ottoman Empire series on AI Deen vision. And today we delve into one of the most controversial and complex reigns in Ottoman history, that of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, the 34th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Known as both a reformer and an autocrat, Abdul Hamid II ruled during a pivotal period that witnessed dramatic changes both within the empire and across the global landscape. His 33-year reign from 1876 to 1909 saw the Ottoman Empire grappling with territorial losses, financial crises, constitutional experiments, and a desperate attempt to preserve what remained of a once mighty empire. Today, in episode 16, we will explore Abdul Hamid's early life, his dramatic ascension to power, his complex approach to modernization, his relationship with the young Ottoman movement, his suspension of the constitution, and the internal challenges he faced throughout his reign. Join us as we uncover the life and times of a sultan who has been called everything from the Great Khan, a leader who fought desperately to save his empire, even as forces beyond his control pulled it apart. This is the story of the Ottoman Empire in its twilight years and the sultan who tried to halt its sunset, early life and ascension to power. Abdul Hamid was born on September 21, 1842, in the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople. He was the son of Sultan Abdul Hamid I and his wife Tirimujgan Sultan. Unlike many Ottoman princes who lived lives of luxury and indulgence, Abdul Hamid experienced personal tragedy at an early age when his mother died when he was only 7 years old. This loss shaped his character, making him more introspective and cautious than his predecessors. Growing up during the Tanzimat reform period, young Abdul Hamid received a more modern education than previous Ottoman princes. He learned French, developed an interest in European literature and technology, and studied Ottoman administration under the tutelage of Grand Vizier Ali Pasha. He also traveled extensively throughout the empire and even to Europe, where he met several European monarchs, including Napoleon III of France and Queen Victoria of Great Britain. These experiences gave Abdul Hamid a unique perspective. He understood the need for modernization, but also witnessed firsthand the European powers' growing encroachment on Ottoman sovereignty. This dual awareness would inform his policies throughout his reign, embracing technical modernization while resisting Western political models that might further weaken the empire. Abdul Hamid's path to the throne was far from straightforward. In the early 1870s, the Ottoman Empire was in dire straits. His uncle, Sultan Abdulaziz, faced mounting financial problems and growing discontent among the reform-minded elite. In May 1876, a coalition of ministers and military officers deposed Abdulaziz in a palace coup. The Sultan died shortly afterward, officially by suicide, though rumors of assassination persisted. Abdulaziz's son, Murad V, ascended to the throne, but his reign would be among the shortest in Ottoman history. After just 3 months, Murad was deposed on grounds of mental instability, though the true reason likely involved his liberal tendencies and close connections to the reformist constitutionalists known as the Young Ottomans. Abdul Hamid, Murad's brother, now emerged as the compromise candidate for the throne. The constitutional reformers, led by Midhat Pasha, believed they could control the seemingly malleable prince. Before his enthronement, they extracted a promise from Abdul Hamid to establish a constitutional government. On August 31, 1876, at the age of 34, Abdul Hamid became Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The new Sultan inherited an empire in crisis. The treasury was nearly bankrupt, rebellions were erupting in the Balkan provinces, and Russia was threatening war. In December 1876, just months after taking the throne, Abdul Hamid fulfilled his promise by promulgating the first Ottoman constitution, which established a bicameral parliament and guaranteed certain basic rights to Ottoman citizens regardless of religion. This momentous event marked the beginning of the first constitutional era. However, those who expected Abdul Hamid to be a puppet ruler would soon be disappointed. The young sultan had his own vision for the empire's future, one that would surprise both his supporters and detractors alike. The Russo-Turkish War and the end of the first constitutional era. Just as Abdul Hamid II was finding his footing as sultan, disaster struck from the north. In April 1877, Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire, ostensibly to protect Orthodox Christians in the Balkans. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877–78 would prove catastrophic for the empire. Ottoman forces, despite fighting valiantly, were overwhelmed by the Russian military. By January 1878, Russian troops had advanced to the outskirts of Constantinople itself, prompting the Ottoman government to sue for peace. The resulting Treaty of San Stefano was a humiliation for the empire, with massive territorial losses in the Balkans, particularly the creation of a large Bulgarian state under Russian influence. The European powers, concerned about growing Russian power, intervened and convened the Congress of Berlin in June 1878. While this Congress moderated some of the harshest terms, the Ottoman Empire still lost significant territories. Romania, Serbia and Montenegro gained full independence. Bulgaria received autonomy, Bosnia and Herzegovina were occupied by Austria-Hungary, and Cyprus came under British administration. Additionally, the empire was forced to pay a large war indemnity to Russia. This devastating defeat had profound consequences for Ottoman domestic politics. Abdul Hamid, already skeptical of the constitutional experiment, now had a convenient scapegoat for the empire's failures: the parliament. He argued that internal political debates had weakened the empire's ability to defend itself and that a strong central authority was needed in times of crisis. On February 14, 1878, Abdul Hamid suspended the constitution and dissolved parliament, bringing the first constitutional era to an abrupt end after just 13 months. This action revealed the Sultan's true political inclinations. He would pursue modernization, but on his own authoritarian terms. The young Ottomans, who had championed constitutionalism, were shocked and dismayed. Many fled into exile, where they would eventually reorganize as the more radical Young Turks. For the next 3 decades, Abdul Hamid would rule as an absolute monarch, centralizing power in his own hands and establishing an elaborate spy network to monitor potential opposition. The Russo-Turkish War and its aftermath represented a pivotal moment in Ottoman history. The empire had lost approximately 1/3 of its territory and about 20% of its population. The Sultan, embittered by what he saw as European betrayal, became increasingly distrustful of Western promises and more determined than ever to strengthen his personal control over what remained of his dominions. Modernization and reform under Abdul Hamid II. Despite his autocratic tendencies, Abdul Hamid II was committed to modernizing the Ottoman Empire, albeit in a controlled, selective manner. His approach to modernization focused on technological, educational, and infrastructure development, while resisting political liberalization. Education was a particular priority. The Sultan established numerous professional schools, including the Imperial School of Law, the School of Finance, the Civil Service Academy, and modern military academies. The University of Istanbul was reorganized and expanded. Primary education became more standardized, with hundreds of new schools built throughout the empire. By the end of his reign, the number of students receiving a modern education had increased tenfold. Transportation and communication infrastructure saw dramatic improvements. The telegraph network, already begun under previous sultans, was greatly expanded, connecting the far-flung provinces to the capital. By 1908, more than 30,000 kilometers of telegraph lines crisscrossed the empire. This technology not only facilitated commerce, but also strengthened central control, allowing Istanbul to communicate rapidly with provincial governors. Railway construction accelerated under Abdul Hamid, often with foreign financing. The famous Baghdad Railway, intended to link Constantinople to the Persian Gulf, was his most ambitious transportation project, though it remained incomplete by the end of his reign. Other important railway lines connected major cities and agricultural regions, stimulating economic growth in previously isolated areas. Urban infrastructure also received attention. Modern water supply systems, gas lighting, and electric tramways were introduced in major cities. Constantinople itself was transformed with new public buildings, many designed in a unique Ottoman Renaissance style that blended traditional elements with European architectural innovations. Healthcare saw significant improvements with the establishment of modern hospitals and medical schools. The Ottoman Red Crescent Society, Hilal-i Ahmer, was founded in 1868 but flourished under Abdul Hamid, providing humanitarian aid during wars and natural disasters. The military underwent extensive reorganization with German assistance. Abdul Hamid invited German officers, led by General Colmar von der Goltz, to retrain the Ottoman army according to Prussian models. The Ottoman navy was also modernized, though it never regained the power it had enjoyed in previous centuries. Legal reforms continued the process begun during the Tanzimat era. New civil, commercial, and criminal codes were implemented, and the court system was reorganized. These reforms represented a further shift away from traditional Islamic law towards European-style legal systems, though Islamic courts continued to function alongside secular ones. Abdul Hamid's modernization efforts faced significant obstacles, most notably the empire's chronic financial problems. In 1881, foreign creditors established the Ottoman Public Debt Administration to ensure repayment of loans, effectively putting much of the empire's finances under international control. This arrangement, while humiliating, did help stabilize Ottoman finances and allowed for continued investment in development projects. The Sultan's approach to modernization was pragmatic rather than ideological. He embraced technological and administrative innovations that would strengthen the state while rejecting political reforms that might undermine his authority or Islamic traditions. This selective modernization created tensions and contradictions within Ottoman society that would ultimately contribute to the end of his reign. Pan-Islamism and Abdul Hamid's ideological response. As territorial losses mounted and European powers encroached ever deeper into Ottoman affairs, Abdul Hamid II needed a unifying ideology to maintain the empire's cohesion and his own legitimacy. His solution was pan-Islamism, emphasizing his role as caliph, spiritual leader of all Muslims, and calling for Islamic unity against Western imperialism. Though the Ottoman sultans had claimed the caliphate since the 16th century, Abdul Hamid was the first to make it central to his political strategy. He actively promoted his image as the defender of Muslims worldwide, not just within the empire's borders. This approach served multiple purposes. It strengthened his domestic position, particularly among Arab subjects. It provided a counterbalance to nationalist movements, and it gave the empire leverage in dealing with European powers who ruled over Muslim populations. Abdul Hamid renovated Islamic holy sites, including the Kaaba in Mecca and the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. He sent emissaries to Muslim communities as far away as Indonesia, India, and China. The Hejaz Railway, connecting Damascus to Medina, was partly conceived as a pan-Islamic project, facilitating pilgrimage to the holy cities and strengthening Ottoman presence in the Arabian Peninsula. The Sultan employed modern communication tools to spread his pan-Islamic message. Newspapers and pamphlets in various languages extolled his role as caliph. Islamic scholars received stipends to promote Ottoman leadership of the Islamic world. When possible, Abdul Hamid intervened diplomatically on behalf of Muslims under European rule, positioning himself as their protector. This pan-Islamic policy achieved some successes. Muslims in British India, Dutch Indonesia, and Russian Central Asia looked to the Ottoman caliph with respect. During the Greco-Turkish War of 1897, donations flowed in from Muslims worldwide. Even non-Ottoman Muslims often preferred Ottoman suzerainty to European colonial rule, as demonstrated when the Akhenezi Sultanate in Sumatra requested Ottoman protection against Dutch expansion. However, pan-Islamism also had significant limitations. The Ottoman Empire lacked the military and economic power to effectively challenge European colonialism. Some Muslim leaders, particularly in North Africa and Central Asia, viewed Ottoman claims with suspicion. And within the empire itself, Arab nationalism was beginning to emerge as a competing ideology, particularly among educated elites. Furthermore, Abdul Hamid's emphasis on Islam complicated relations with the empire's substantial Christian populations, especially in the Balkans. Though the Sultan did not systematically persecute Christians, his Islamic rhetoric sometimes exacerbated religious tensions, and instances of violence against Christian communities, most notoriously the Armenian massacres of 1894–96, damaged the empire's international standing. Pan-Islamism represented Abdul Hamid's attempt to find an authentic Ottoman response to the challenges of modernity and imperialism. It was neither wholly successful nor entirely a failure, but it significantly shaped the final decades of Ottoman history and influenced Islamic political thought well into the 20th century. The Hamidian era, culture, society, and daily life. The 3 decades of Abdul Hamid's rule represented a distinct period in Ottoman cultural and social history, characterized by both traditional revival and accelerating modernization. In literature, this period witnessed the rise of Ottoman Romanticism and early realism. Notable writers like Namik Kemal, despite facing censorship, produced influential works that blended Western literary forms with Ottoman themes. The novel emerged as a significant new genre, with Halit Ziya Usaklagil's My Visaya, Blue and Black, considered one of the masterpieces of the era. Journalism flourished despite strict censorship. Newspapers like Turkmeni Hakikat, Interpreter of Truth, and Ikdam, Perseverance, achieved substantial circulation. Many journalists operated from exile, publishing in cities like Paris, Geneva, and Cairo. Visual arts experienced significant transformation. Traditional Ottoman miniature painting declined further, while Western-style painting gained prominence. The Imperial School of Fine Arts, established in 1882, trained a generation of Ottoman artists in European techniques. Architecture combined Ottoman, Islamic, and European elements in an eclectic Ottoman revivalism style. Education expanded dramatically during this period. Modern schools using contemporary teaching methods spread throughout the empire. Education for women received unprecedented attention, with the first teacher training college for women established in 1870 and expanded under Abdul Hamid. By the end of his reign, literacy rates had improved significantly in urban areas. Daily life for ordinary Ottomans varied enormously depending on region, religion, and social class. In major cities, the upper and middle classes increasingly adopted European fashions and social customs. Coffee houses evolved into more sophisticated establishments. Theatres and music halls provided new forms of entertainment. The position of women began to change, albeit slowly. Upper-class urban women gained access to education and greater mobility, though gender segregation persisted. Women's magazines like Hanimlara Mahsus Gazete, Ladies' Own Gazette, advocated for women's education and discussed their role in a modernizing society. The Hamidian era was also marked by significant demographic changes. The empire became increasingly Muslim as Christian territories in the Balkans achieved independence and Muslim refugees from these regions poured into remaining Ottoman lands. Opposition movements and the Young Turks, despite Abdul Hamid's extensive spy network and repressive measures, opposition to his autocratic rule grew steadily throughout his reign. The most significant challenge came from the Young Turks, a diverse coalition of reform-minded intellectuals, military officers, and government officials who advocated for constitutional government. The origins of the Young Turk movement can be traced to the 1889 founding of the Ottoman Unity Society, Ittihad-i Osmani Cemiyeti, by students at the Imperial Military Medical School. This secret society, later renamed the Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, initially operated underground within the empire but eventually established centers in Paris, Geneva, Cairo, and other cities beyond the Sultan's reach. The Young Turks were ideologically diverse, united mainly by their opposition to Abdul Hamid's absolutism. Some were liberals inspired by Western democratic ideals, others were Turkish nationalists. Still others advocated for a multicultural Ottoman identity. They published newspapers and journals that were smuggled into the Ottoman Empire, criticizing the Sultan's policies and advocating for constitutional government. Within the military, discontent grew as officers, particularly those with modern education, chafed under the Sultan's micromanagement. Many junior officers joined secret Young Turk cells, creating a dangerous fifth column within Abdul Hamid's most important power base. The Young Turk Revolution finally erupted in July 1908. The spark came from the Macedonian city of Monastir, where Major Ahmed Niazi Bey and his followers took to the mountains in armed rebellion. The movement spread rapidly through the military units in the European provinces. When the Sultan sent loyal troops to suppress the revolt, many of them defected to the revolutionaries. Faced with this military uprising and unable to rely on his own forces, Abdul Hamid capitulated. On July 24, 1908, he announced the restoration of the 1876 constitution and the reconvening of Parliament. This date marked the beginning of the second constitutional era, and effectively ended Abdul Hamid's absolute rule, though he remained sultan for another 9 months. The counter-coup and deposition. Abdul Hamid II did not accept his diminished role peacefully. As divisions emerged among the Young Turks, the Sultan saw an opportunity to restore his power. This led to the counter-coup of April 1909. The counter-revolutionary forces centered around the Islamic clergy, conservative military officers loyal to the Sultan, and religious students. On April 13, 1909, these reactionary elements staged an uprising in Constantinople. Soldiers mutinied against their Young Turk officers, crying, "We want Sharia," and demanding the restoration of Islamic law. For a brief moment, it appeared Abdul Hamid had regained control. The Grand Vizier and his cabinet resigned, and several prominent Young Turk leaders fled the capital. The Sultan accepted the resignations and appointed a more conservative government. However, the Young Turks quickly regrouped. The Third Army Corps in Macedonia, commanded by Mahmud Shevket Pasha, and including a young officer named Mustafa Kemal, later Ataturk, marched on the capital in what became known as the Action Army, Hareket Ordusu. By April 24th, they had retaken Constantinople and suppressed the counter-revolution. The failure of the counter-coup sealed Abdul Hamid's fate. The parliament voted to depose the Sultan on April 27, 1909. A fatwa, religious decree, was obtained from the Sheikh-ul-Islam, giving religious legitimacy to this political decision. Abdul Hamid was informed of his deposition by a delegation that included his own brother-in-law. The deposed Sultan reportedly accepted the news with resignation, saying, "What can I do? This is fate." He was immediately sent into exile to Salonika, then still part of the Ottoman Empire. His younger brother succeeded him as Mehmed V Resad, a mild-mannered man who would reign but not rule as a constitutional monarch. Abdul Hamid lived in exile for the remaining years of his life. When Salonika fell to Greece during the Balkan Wars of 1912-13, he was allowed to return to Constantinople, where he was kept under house arrest in Beylerbey Palace. He died there on February 10, 1918, just months before the final collapse of the empire he had fought to preserve. Sultan Abdul Hamid II's reign represents one of the most complex periods in Ottoman history. He was simultaneously a modernizer and a traditionalist, an autocrat who initially supported constitutionalism, a ruler who expanded education while imposing strict censorship. Under his leadership, the Ottoman Empire experienced remarkable technological and infrastructural development. Railways, telegraphs, modern schools and hospitals transformed daily life for many of his subjects. Yet, these material improvements came at the cost of political freedoms, with Abdul Hamid's spy network creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. His pan-Islamic policies strengthened the empire's ties with Muslims worldwide, but complicated relations with Christian subjects and Western powers. His selective approach to modernization, embracing Western technology while rejecting Western political models, created tensions that ultimately proved unsustainable. Perhaps Abdul Hamid's greatest failure was his inability to halt the empire's territorial disintegration. Despite his diplomatic skill and modernization efforts, the Ottoman Empire continued to lose ground to European powers and national independence movements. Yet we must also acknowledge the extraordinary challenges Abdul Hamid faced. He inherited an empire already in deep crisis, financially bankrupt, militarily weakened, and surrounded by predatory powers. That the Ottoman state survived at all during this period owes something to his tenacity and vision. Abdul Hamid's legacy remains contested to this day. To some, he was the Red Sultan, a paranoid despot responsible for political repression. To others, he was a misunderstood modernizer who fought valiantly against Western imperialism and worked to preserve Islamic sovereignty. What is certain is that Abdul Hamid II was the last Ottoman Sultan to exercise genuine power. His deposition in 1909 marked the end of an era, not just for the Ottoman dynasty, but for the Islamic world's last great independent empire. In our next episode, we will continue exploring Sultan Abdul Hamid II's complex legacy. Episode 17 will delve deeper into his reform programs, his pan-Islamic vision, and the final years of his reign that witnessed the empire's continuing decline. We'll examine how his policies shaped the Ottoman Empire's last decades and laid groundwork that would influence Turkish and Middle Eastern history well into the 20th century. Thank you for watching this episode of the Ottoman Empire series on AI Deen Vision. If you've enjoyed this historical journey, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell to stay updated on new episodes. We appreciate your comments and questions. Please share your thoughts below. What aspects of Sultan Abdul Hamid II's reign did you find most interesting? What topics would you like us to cover in future episodes? Until next time, this is AI Deen Vision, bringing Islamic history to life. Allah Hafiz.